Hi guys, and welcome to the second video in my series on filming puppets. In the last one we went through the why, the what and the who. This time we're going to move on to something in a bit more depth, which is the equipment. So this is going to be a section on its own because I don't want it to be a huge video and I want to concentrate a little bit so that it doesn't get messy. Obviously one of the major things you're going to need if you're filming puppets are the puppets themselves. It sounds a silly thing to say, but obviously you don't want to go out on location, for example, get all the way out there and find that actually you forgot the one thing you really need. So there's nothing more annoying than getting out and find, especially if you're using multiple puppets, you might pick one up and think you've got what you need, but then you find out all of a sudden that you've actually left a key puppet behind. So obviously that's a key thing to do, but this isn't really about that. This is more about what you use to film the puppets, all the technical stuff. First of all is the main thing, the camera. Now if you're just filming puppets for your own benefit, if I'm stood here, I've got a puppet, but I want to know what I look like from that perspective. Even setting something up simple like a phone with a camera is more than acceptable. At the end of the day, this is for your own benefit, and therefore you don't really need anything spectacular. Even the sound doesn't have to be great because you're not worried what it sounds like, other than being able to tell whether your puppetry is getting better or getting worse. But we'll work on the basis that actually what you want to do is show other people. Now in certain circumstances, like in clubs or like in church or whatever, you'll often find they use older projection systems, and actually the resolution of the systems is still on the 4:3 ratio, which is like your old VJ standard. So therefore you don't need HD or full HD. So if you have an older camera, this one here is one that I started off with, and this is a mini DV camera, JVC one, and actually one of the first summer series that I did that I've got on my YouTube channel was actually filmed on this thing. Now I was fortunate that it did have an external microphone jack, and I would highly recommend that if you are able to use an external microphone that you do, because you will find whatever you record on that the audio is never going to be great, but I'll get into that in a moment. But as far as the actual device that you're recording on visually, you know, this can work quite well. The more up-to-date ones obviously record HD at the very least, some of them full HD, some even 4K and greater resolutions. Now excuse me, so one of these is fine if you're doing in a church or something where you've got a low resolution system, but really, realistically, you want to be shooting HD at the very least. Now you can get cameras like this, which is just a small compact camera, and again, these do video recording, as do things like iPhones and the like, and a lot of them do actually record in HD. Now the only downside you get with this is the fact that the audio again is rubbish. So if you haven't got a great deal of money but you've got one of these, you can certainly start with these. But the only thing I wouldn't rely on is the audio, because you're just never going to get a great audio. Obviously it depends on your audience, but you'll find most of the times people will put up with bad visuals, but they won't put up with bad audio. So you've got what it is that you want to record. Oh, I will add to that. When I started off with this thing, and then what I did actually move on to was a DSLR camera, which I'll show you a picture up there because I'm actually using it at the moment to record myself on. I happen to use a Nikon D5300 camera, but it's nothing spectacular. There are older cameras and there are newer cameras and there are different makes that all do video recording in HD or full HD, and work perfectly well for doing this sort of thing. So if you happen to have or know someone that has a digital SLR camera, again, that's something you can use. I happen to use that because I find it works really well, and the fact that you can change the lenses is also a bonus in certain situations, which is something you do get over these other cameras. So that's the visual kind of things really. They're the main things that you can look at. Obviously if you're filming like I'm filming here, where I have absolutely nobody else behind the scenes, what you will need is a fairly decent tripod. And if you're going to be filming outside, you want one that's going to be reasonably sturdy, especially if it's windy. So don't have something too flimsy if you can get away with it. because at the end of the day you run the risk that it's actually going to fall over or get wobbled around, and there's nothing worse than shaky footage if you don't really need it. Try and avoid handheld situations unless you're doing a running gun shot or something similar where it actually calls for that kind of thing. But under normal circumstances, a tripod works really well. Okay, so now we've got the actual visual side of things pinned down. What about the audio? Now, there are many different ways to do the audio. As I'm talking to you now, I've got two audio sources. I've got a Rode shotgun mic, which is on the top of my camera. And again, I'll show you a picture up there just so you know what it looks like. And that takes fairly good quality audio into the camera. Now, as well as recording my voice, it also records a little bit of the ambience around me, although it is more directional. So if you're in a situation where you're recording fairly close to the camera and you want to get people's voices, especially multiple people, but you also want to get the ambience around, then that's a good way to go. I'm actually using it more in this case as a reference audio, so that when I synchronize the audio in this lapel mic, then I can sync it up to the visuals in the camera, so that they don't look like I'm doing some sort of badly dubbed film. So that's one option. Another option is an actual separate shotgun mic. So I've got one here. So this one I actually got off of eBay. This part, which they call a dead cat, I bought separately, and this is absolutely invaluable if you're going to do any filming outside. It doesn't even need to be a very windy day, and you will find that the slightest bit of wind and you'll hear that really, well, you've probably heard it on some programs, it's like somebody's breathing in your ear. It's quite a sharp sound. But the actual microphone itself is quite slim. It does normally come with just a foam cover over it. I got this one off of eBay. It's powered by an AA battery. And it's either off, on, or you could have like a super long throw, which is probably great for listening into people, but it's rubbish audio if you can do that. So you just have it on the normal setting, and then this just runs to a 3.5mm audio jack, which I could plug into my camera here, but as an alternative I plug it into an audio recorder. So the third type of microphone is the lapel mic, which I've got on at the moment, and if you're doing just audio for yourself, then that is a pretty good way to go if you don't want any ambient background, or you want to add something in later, because obviously the voice is close to the lapel mic, you're only picking up what you need, and if you're doing direct speaking as I am now, it's the best way to get the closest pickup of the voice, assuming you've got a fairly decent microphone. Now, in my pocket, I have this thing here. This is a Tascam DR-05 audio recorder. Now, it's nothing overly special, but this is something that can be very, very useful. You don't have to go for something like this if you're going to go for a separate audio recorder, but this is one of the cheaper ones that's out there. It has a 3.5mm jack into it, which works well for the lapel mic, which also needs phantom power, and again that can supply the phantom power. It has built-in microphones if I wanted to just hold it in my hand to record things, and also being the 3.5mm jack, I can plug in the shotgun mic as well. Another thing it has, which is very, very important to have, is a headphone jack. Now, if you're doing any audio recording, it's always a very, very good idea to monitor the sound. Now, in this instance, for me to be wearing headphones while I'm doing what I'm doing doesn't really work. Now, I've set it up in advance, hoping that the levels are great, and if they're not, we'll soon find out, because I'll be using the audio off of the camera. But also, if you're doing, for example, if you're doing puppetry, I did a series with the schools out, probably 4 years ago now, and in that instance we did some shooting in a classroom. Now, it was the first time we'd used the DSLR camera, and all I did was plug the shotgun mic directly into the camera input. It was a friend's camera. Now, the camera itself doesn't have a headphone jack on it, and because of that we weren't able to monitor the sound. And after we'd played everything back, what we hadn't realised at the time is a couple of the arm rods kept chinking against the metal of the chairs and the table legs. So as people were talking, you could hear a dink, dink, dink ding, ding, which just was a little bit distracting. So if whatever you do in the way of audio, you really should either monitor it at the very least, which would be the best idea, or check it once you've recorded it and listen back just to make sure that you don't hear anything that shouldn't be there. Especially if you're doing things on location or whatever, where it's difficult to go back and redo what you're doing. Now you can audio dub and so on and so forth, which is the sort of thing that Hollywood films do, but it's a pain in the backside at the very least. So that's regards to, so we've got the camera, we've got the microphones. One other thing I did want to just say about the shotgun microphone is what I've done is you get a telescopic pole which is used for doing rollers when you're doing DIY for painting, and you can actually get a clip for this which just goes onto a shoe, and you can place that on the top of the pole and just tape it on, and then you've got yourself an extending pole, so you can actually hold this closer to the people that are speaking. And you can also move it from person to person as well. The only thing you need to be careful of is this, the cables can pick up a bit of noise sometimes when you move them, but this is quite cheap. I think it's about 30 quid off of eBay. You can get decent quality ones. Rode is a very well known make for these sort of microphones, but you're talking sort of £300 or £400, whereas this was about 30 quid off of eBay. So now we've got the camera, the tripod and the microphone, and obviously the audio recorder. Another thing that you might want is some sort of monitor. Now in this instance I've got a PC monitor just down in front of me here, which I can see myself on, and it's got an HDMI input, so I've taken a lead from my camera straight into the telly, and I can actually see myself so that I can work out where I'm standing and make sure that when I'm holding things they're in the right place. Now that works fine in this instance because I've got power here quite happily, but when you're out and about you don't always have that luxury. Now if you have a recorder of some degree, whether it be a phone or whatever, that's got a fairly big screen and your eyesight's better than mine, you can probably just look at the screen, get everything in focus and you'll be fine. But sometimes you can't always see things very clearly, especially if it's bright. This is where something like this comes in. If I open it up, this is a monitor. So this runs on batteries. The batteries that this runs on actually are quite a universal fitting, and they run on lots of other things which I'll show you in a moment, and it's got an HDMI in and an HDMI out. It will run on DC power, so if you're indoors you can do that, but it also runs on batteries, so if you're shooting in the middle of a field or you're shooting in a building or somewhere that doesn't have power, then it doesn't matter because this thing will deal with it. It has connections on the bottom, on the top and on the sides, so you can mount it either onto a tripod or you can mount it onto the top of your camera depending on what camera you've got, and it's got this cover over there so that if it's bright and sunny you can still see the screen. So normally if I'm doing any shooting I will use this, but when I started I didn't have one, and it's not compulsory but it's certainly useful to have. This is Viltrox. And this again was off of eBay. eBay is my friend with a lot of things because it's the cheapest way I can do things because I'm a bit of a cheapskate. The batteries generally come as a separate thing, but like I say, they're so widely available it's not an issue. And I think this was around about the £70 mark. They do vary from about £70 to £100. But what I would suggest with any of these things is if you don't have it, it's not desperate, and if you can get away with it, don't buy it. The fact that I've got this equipment and I can show you just shows you what's available and what you can do and what helps you, but please don't think I'm saying you must have, because it's not the way it works. Okay, so there's that. Then we move on to the lighting. Now, as I am at the minute, I'm in my little office at home and I've got LED strip lights on the ceiling, and that's giving enough light for what we're doing here. But sometimes you want something a little bit more directional, especially if, like, sometimes we filmed in our church when we're setting up something on the green screen or whatever, or or whatever, and sometimes it's a little bit the lighting's a bit poor. Even in a normal house situation, if you look at studios, they always have lots and lots of lights, and the reason is normal lighting just doesn't cut it. So you will want at some point to look at additional lighting if you want things to look a little bit better. Now if you're in a situation where again you don't have any electricity or whatever, you can buy things like this. This again is a Viltrox product, but there are different ones available, and this runs on batteries, same kind of batteries that the monitor runs on. It's got an on-off switch on the back, so it can turn on there. You can adjust the power so it's not quite as bright. You can also change the color temperature. Now by default the big bright white is kind of what they call daylight color, but then you can have a slightly sort of browner light which is more for your kind of indoor lighting, to match what you've got. So because if you have any extra lighting you don't really want it to look out of place. Now another thing that I use, which I don't have here unfortunately, being in lockdown it's difficult to get hold of, but I've got a picture of it up there, are softbox lighting. Now they use them quite a lot for photography studios, and I got my set off of eBay. I think I got 2 of them for around about the £30 mark. Came with a carrying bag, both on tripods, and just huge bulbs that look like corkscrews. Now you can only use them indoors where there's power, or you can use them outdoors if you've got an extension lead. So when you're out and about, you kind of got to work with what you got, but that's something that you can use for indoors. Now one thing you can do as well, I don't have one, but it's something that I'm probably going to look at getting at some point, is you can get a reflector, which basically is a huge disc that folds up, and if you're out and about, say for example we're outside and it works that you want to film me in this position but the sun is over here. Now it might be that my face looks dark, and no matter how much you adjust exposure or whatever else, you can't quite get my face bright enough. Now what you can use is use one of these discs which basically looks like reflective foil, and then you could place it that side of me, perhaps between me and the camera or just behind the camera, and you can use that to reflect the sunlight back upon me. It's not a harsh reflection, but it's enough just to brighten things up. So again, that's something else that you can use, and it works on puppets as much as it works on people, because even puppets in the dark don't always work particularly well. The last thing we'll get into at the moment is green screen. Now if you want to do green screen, that's absolutely fine, but one thing you do need to do is make sure it's set up properly. Now it doesn't matter what you use for the green screen, or even what colour it is to a degree. Green is the best colour because it's one that isn't in other things as a general rule, but if you can get as close to like the chroma green as you can, that just makes life easier, especially if you're working with multiple things. I just bought mine as a big piece of green fabric from a local fabric shop, and then I bought myself a stand set up which is actually designed for doing photography and draping backdrops. Again, bought it off of eBay, cost me about 30 quid. That's what it looks like up there. And then you just need to make sure that it's evenly lit. As far as green screen is concerned, it's pretty much a subject in itself. So that's something perhaps I'll go in depth in a bit more in another video at some point. But that's the equipment. I may have missed a couple of bits, but essentially there's lots of choices that you can do, and these are the things that you can work up through. But if you can borrow it rather than buy it, borrow it. You know, don't buy things unless you need to, and just work with what you got. But if you can get the best you can, then the output is going to be worth it. So I'm going to move on, and the next thing will be your planning.